Every bird that has ever visited your yard has already made a decision about you. Not a vague animal instinct. A specific, updated, retrievable verdict. The bird at your feeder right now is not just eating. It is completing an assessment that started the first time it ever saw you. Most people assume birds tolerate humans the way furniture tolerates people, passively, without preference, without memory. That assumption is wrong. What the science of the last 20 years has established is something far more precise, and once you understand it, impossible to forget. Birds judge. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. In measurable, documentable, species-specific ways that researchers have now replicated across multiple continents. They observe your behavior. They categorize what they see. They update the file every time you appear. And they act on their conclusions. Welcome to Feather Logic. If this is your first time here, subscribe now, because what you are about to learn will permanently change how you read every bird outside your door. Today we are going to walk through exactly how birds assess the humans in their territory, what they measure, how they store it, and what they do with it. We are going to cover 7 mechanisms of avian judgment. Stay through the end, because Mechanism 7 is the one that researchers did not predict, and it is the finding that changes what every other mechanism means for you specifically. Let's start with what birds actually see when they look at you. Mechanism 1. They read your movement before they register anything else. The first thing a bird evaluates about a human is not your face. It is not your size. It is how you move. Research from a University of Exeter published in the journal PLOS 1 examined how wild birds respond to humans who approach at different speeds and with different behavioral patterns. The finding was unambiguous. Birds assign threat levels primarily based on movement style, pace, predictability, directness of approach, before any other variable came into play. A human walking the same path at the same time every day creates what researchers call a predictability signature. Birds in that yard begin filing that person as low threat within days of consistent exposure. A human who moves erratically, stops and starts, changes direction, or approaches the feeder suddenly, even quietly, is classified as high threat regardless of their actual intent. This means the birds in your yard have been reading your posture, your speed, and your rhythm since the first morning you stepped outside. The verdict was forming before you knew you were being watched. Mechanism 2. They know your face with more precision than you would expect. The landmark study on this comes from a University of Washington, where researchers captured and banded crows while wearing specific latex masks, then re-entered crow territory wearing the same masks weeks later. The crows, which had never been approached again by those specific researchers, immediately responded with alarm, scolding, mobbing, and recruiting other birds to join. When researchers wearing neutral masks walked the same paths, nothing happened. The crows had stored the threatening face independently from everything else, including body size, clothing, and movement. What followed was more striking. Researchers who had never worn the mask put it on for the first time months later. The crows responded identically, as if that face had personally threatened them. The information had been transmitted socially. A face the younger birds had never encountered had been marked, distributed, and remembered through a process that looked strikingly like cultural learning. This was documented for crows, the most cognitively studied bird in North American yards. But facial recognition in some form has since been documented in mockingbirds, in pigeons, and with behavioral evidence consistent with this process in chickadees and cardinals. You have a face in their system. The question is only which column you are filed under. Mechanism 3. They track the difference between what you do once and what you do consistently. This is the mechanism most people do not consider, and it explains the most frustrating bird behavior, when a yard that was full of birds suddenly empties and stays empty. Birds do not simply respond to individual events. They weight patterns over time. A single threatening incident, a sudden movement, a dog that ran toward the feeder, a window collision, registers but does not permanently classify. What registers permanently is repetition. Research on urban bird habituation consistently shows that birds categorize humans based on behavioral consistency over time, not isolated incidents. The implication runs in both directions. A yard where a human consistently behaves calmly, refills the feeder on a schedule, and moves quietly near nesting areas builds a positive classification that compounds over months and years. A yard where the human is sometimes calm and sometimes unpredictable, sometimes present and sometimes gone for weeks, fails to build the kind of trust that produces the deepest bird engagement. Consistency is not just a nicety. It is the data that birds use to decide whether a human belongs in their model of a safe world. Think about that for a moment. The birds in your yard are not responding to who you are in any given moment. They are responding to who you have been, on average, across every morning they have watched you. Mechanism 4. They broadcast their assessment of you to every bird within earshot. This is where avian judgment moves from individual to collective, and where your standing in the yard is determined not just by your own behavior but by the reputation that precedes you. Chickadees produce what researchers call mobbing calls and contact calls with embedded information about threat level. Other species eavesdrop on these calls not passively but deliberately, adjusting their own behavior in response. Research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and from studies in the UK, Japan, and Australia has confirmed that heterospecific eavesdropping, the active monitoring of other species' calls, is a widespread and sophisticated behavior. When a chickadee at your feeder produces a soft, settled contact call as you approach, every other bird within 100 feet receives that information. The call is not random noise. It is a transmission. If the chickadee calls alarm, the sharp, short chips that signal elevated threat, the feeder empties in under 3 seconds, and birds that were not even watching you respond to a report they received from a witness. Here's what that means for your yard right now. Your reputation is not held by one bird. It is distributed across a live, constantly updating network of animals that communicate with each other all day, every day. Your name was entered into that network the first morning any of them saw you. And it has been updated every morning since. Mechanism 5. They notice when your behavior toward them changes, and they update the file. This is the mechanism that carries the most hope for anyone who has made mistakes in their yard, chased birds away, startled them, let the feeder run empty through a long winter. Birds are not static judges. The classification system runs in both directions. A human who was previously logged as threatening can be reclassified over time with consistent, patient, non-threatening behavior. Research on wildlife habituation shows that most songbird species can rebuild trust with a changed human presence within a single season if the behavioral shift is consistent and unambiguous. The process is slower than the initial classification. Trust that was lost requires more evidence to rebuild than it took to establish. But the pathway is open. What matters is understanding that birds are not holding grudges out of stubbornness. They are following evidence. If you change the evidence, the file eventually changes. The chickadee that stopped coming to your feeder after a bad winter is not gone forever. It is waiting for a pattern that justifies return. Mechanism 6. They share information about you with birds that have never met you. We touched on this with the crow research, but the full scope of this mechanism goes further than most people realize, and it applies well beyond corvids. In species with strong flock cohesion, chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, the mixed winter flocks that move through yards together operate as a shared information network. When a new bird joins a flock that has established history with a yard and a specific human, it inherits the behavioral stance of the group before any personal experience of its own. The bird lands at your feeder for the first time. It has never seen you. But the birds it arrived with have years of history with your yard. Its initial threat calibration is borrowed from them. This is why yards that have hosted birds for many years tend to have unusually relaxed populations, birds that allow closer approach than you would ever expect from wild animals. The tolerance was built by earlier birds and transmitted forward through social learning. You did not earn each of those birds individually. Some of them arrived already knowing you were safe. Mechanism 7. Their final verdict on you is not about what you have done, it is about what they can predict you will do next. This is the finding researchers did not anticipate. And it is the one that changes what everything before it means. Birds are not moral judges. They do not evaluate kindness as an abstract concept. What they are actually measuring, with precise attention, across days and weeks of observation, is your predictability. A human who is consistent in schedule, consistent in how they move near nesting areas, consistent in every small routine behavior around the yard, produces the lowest threat response in the birds around them, regardless of emotional state on any given day. A human who is sometimes all of those things but sometimes not produces a higher baseline threat response. Because unpredictability itself is the variable that most concerns a prey animal with no ability to defend itself. The birds in your yard are not asking whether you are good. They are asking whether you are readable. Whether they can model your behavior far enough ahead to feel safe. This is the verdict that matters most. Not affection. Not indifference. Something rarer and more specific than either, the decision that you are safe enough to stop monitoring. When you have earned that from them, you will know it. Not because they came closer. Because they stopped watching for a reason to leave. Most people will spend their entire lives standing in their yards without ever knowing that assessment was happening. Without knowing that the cardinal holding his position on the branch, the chickadee moving easily to the feeder without pause, those behaviors are not accidents. They are conclusions. You have been evaluated. The sounds you hear right now, the contact calls, the settled morning chatter, the absence of alarm, those sounds include the result. Tell me in the comments, is there one bird in your yard that stays close no matter what you do, one that keeps eating when everything else pulls back? I want to know what it is, and how long it has been coming. I read every one. I'll see you in the next.